Hey folks, it is April the 21st, and today we are going to continue on with our lecture on the U.S. Civil War. So we're about to start the fighting. We've already started with some of the states have been seceding. And just as a note, Friday is technically an A-day, but since it's a half day, we're not going to have a lecture. As far as we know, students in high school are going to go to the first period class and the second period class. And then the fun run's supposed to start. This Friday. Or it might rain us out. If it rains us out, we're going to reschedule but still have a half day. I don't know where you go third period, though. I don't know if you go third period class because some kids go to lunch on third period on A-day. So I don't know how they're going to do that. We'll figure it out. But in any case, you'll be gone before this class starts. So no lecture. But next week's an A week. So we're going to have lecture Monday and Wednesday next week. And we are going to have our final exam on Friday. And it will be due by the end of Monday. I will not accept it after that without a doctor's note. If you get it in late, you don't bother to contact me till Tuesday, you get a 0. And I'm going to pass it along through email as well. This is just part of the college credit. I mean, barring an emergency, I just can't let you do that. Like 4 days to do an online final exam is plenty of time. It's plenty of time. All right, so moving on from there, that background picture, though it's messed up, that's Frederick Douglass. That's the one and only president of the Confederate States of America, not United. So Jefferson Davis. Yeah, Jefferson Davis was he was a U.S. senator, and he was a big-time champion for the cause of Southern state rights, pro-slavery movement, and all this other stuff. But he was more of a moderate, so the Southerners saw him as somebody who could join them together. He was appointed by Confederate delegates to be their first and only president. He wasn't elected. They were quickly trying to piece together a patched-up government. And the story goes, he was tending his little garden in his front lawn, and then a courier came by with a letter, and he opened it up, and it said, "You, sir, have been chosen to be the president of the newly formed government of the Confederate States." And he's like, "Oh, okay." And so he went off and did it because he saw it as his duty to his state, Virginia. Of course, the capital of the Confederacy will be in Richmond, Virginia, as we'll see. And that's going to be a major focus of the Union Army until they finally figure out that what the Confederacy really was, its heart was its army. It wasn't its government. Government was just kind of there. They didn't even really get much done. They couldn't agree on things. It was really silly. Like even Robert E. Lee said that when he went to go visit, he just saw just how incompetent they were. They were just chewing on peanuts, sitting around and spitting tobacco, not getting any legislation or funds for the war effort. So back to Davis. He, like others, believed that the South had to take a strong stance against outside influence, which was from Washington, D.C. Otherwise, they would lose control of their own internal affairs. So they thought that the world was falling apart, and the only thing they could do was to separate from what they saw as something that was attacking them. U.S. President Buchanan, who was the president before Lincoln, believed that the South could not legally leave the Union, but that he could not constitutionally force the South to stay either. So he's like, you can't do this, it's illegal, but there's nothing I can do because there doesn't say anything in the Constitution about it. Now, the Constitution does say that the president has the right to put down insurrections. So if he would have called it an insurrection, then he would have legal authority, but whatever. Lincoln, however, the newly incoming president, remember, he was elected but you got to wait a few months before you could take office. All of this stuff is happening very quickly. Lincoln stated, my quote, "My opinion is that no state can in any way lawfully get out of the Union without the consent of the others," end quote. So Lincoln saw this as something as more of an agreement. The states agreed to join the Union. The states would have to agree for them to leave, much like an amendment process, much like the adoption of the Constitution, with essentially with ratification. He's like, you didn't do anything like that. So, March 4th, 1861, Lincoln was inaugurated as our 16th president. So you say it's in March. It took longer back then. It was a longer period between being elected and getting into office.
When did he get elected?
November. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah, so it took a while. And all this time, you've got states leaving. Remember, like 7 states seceded and formed a new government. They're at this time, they're sending delegates down to Texas and other states that haven't quite left yet, but they're really not happy about what's going on with this Lincoln fella. They're hearing all these stories about these crazy things he's going to have them do. And they don't like it. Now, he's not saying crazy things, but the people who like write the tabloids and stuff are saying otherwise. Let's move on. Oh, this is so lame. I need to fix the next one. All right, so this is the firing on Fort Sumter. So this is where it all is going to begin. Not the violence. Remember, we already talked about the violence that already started. But this is when we have organized military against organized military and the official start of the war. So, slide's titled, "The War Begins." Before Lincoln was sworn into office, South Carolina, remember, that was the original secessionist state back during Andrew Jackson. And now they're the first one to leave and then ask the others to join their new Confederacy. So South Carolina officials ordered the state militia to seize 2 forts and the federal arsenal in Virginia. Remember, an arsenal is where they keep weapons and munitions, stuff like that. Federal troops then all moved to Fort Sumter as a response. So they were withdrawing back to a more defensible position. The state militias, you could think of it as kind of like the National Guard, right? So they're seizing their things. They're like, this is no longer federal property. This is within the border of our states. Therefore, it is our property, and you need to move out. Whereas the federal troops are like, no, we have sworn an oath to maintain and to keep these things, and it is federal property, and we don't even recognize your secession. So, got some disagreements there. A Union ship attempted to reach the fort, but was fired upon by the Confederates. President Buchanan did nothing. So this fort is on a little bitty island off the coast of South Carolina, but it's within range of cannon fire. So now South Carolina, they didn't really have a navy, so they couldn't bring by these big galleons or these frigates to come by and bombard the thing. But they were able to use their mortars and their cannons in order to reach these walls. As soon as Lincoln took office, he found out that supplies were running low in the fort, so they're going hungry. He informed South Carolina he was going to send a boat with food to the troops. Now, that was truth and a lie. He was kind of baiting them because he was actually also sending in a lot of weapons and stuff like that too. He was like, okay, you're going hungry. You're going to send some food, and we're going to tell South Carolina we're sending food, but we're also going to send you some more gunpowder and guns so you can keep those guys out of there. Okay, guys? Davis had the Confederate General P.G.T. Beauregard demand the fort's evacuation. It's like, get out of there or else. The Union commander, Major Anderson, refused. So on April 11th, the Confederates fired upon the fort. After 34 hours, Anderson surrendered the fort and the war began. Towards the end of the war, this same major after being a prisoner of war, will actually come back to this fort and raise the American flag. Of course, it's going to take a while. There's like a whole war between then and that. So yeah, the ship that Lincoln sent was fired upon. We see acts of aggression. The Confederates are like, you made the first act of aggression by doing two things. First, you sent a boat down there when we told you to stop, and we know it had weapons. And the second part is both sides blamed one another for shooting first. So they were both building up reasons for why they were right and why they were the ones who were actually defending what was right. And the other is an aggressor. So we're seeing the buildup of propaganda, wartime propaganda. You got to have that. You had to have those ideas in people's heads. They're not going to die for a lie if they know it's a lie. But if they believe in the cause, and both sides, especially the South at first, is really going to believe in the cause. But later on, as the war drags on, there's going to be a lot of disenchanted Confederates who are sick and tired of dying for slave owners who don't even help in the fight. So, like, hey, why am I dying for your right to own slaves when you're like at home? So, of course, they're going to have similar feelings from Northerners who are going to notice that the rich tend to get out of the war while they have to go fight and go into the meat grinder. So, pretty big deal. Now, it's the end of my part 1 slides. I'm going to switch us over to part 2. Before we do that, let me check the Google Classroom to make sure did I post the notes for this Civil War? If not, I better do it right now. I will.
Actually, I think you did.
Okay. I see my after the Cold War
Yeah,
notes.
Civil War notes, right there.
Okay, cool. Here, I'm gonna go.
Yeah, I remember when it popped up.
I'm gonna go ahead and post part 2 before I
Alright.
forget. So I don't want our people at home missing out.
Oh no.
No copy paste. All right. Key stick. Part 2. All right. Part 2 notes are now posted. Hip hip huzzah. So back to this. All right. So, well, hey, this transition's working. All right. Who's that guy?
No idea. Lincoln.
What? Robert
Downey Jr.
E. Lee. That's Robert E. Lee. Yeah. So, and we talked about it a bit later. Yeah.
I've only seen him younger.
Yeah. I think this picture is a photo op after the war.
Robert Martinez, I knew it.
Of course, yeah, there is. So yeah, Robert E. Lee, after the wars, of course, he's going to be I think a deacon for a college all the way up until his death. Yeah, he's going to have his during the war, he's going to have his property confiscated, which is now, what's the name of our national cemetery?
It's
Where's
the Arlington Cemetery.
Arlington National Cemetery. Yeah, that was his plantation that his wife brought from their marriage, and
I remember reading about that. I love the plaque.
yeah, and they were like, you know what? We're so mad at this guy. Not only are we going to take his plantation, but all of those Union soldiers who died in the war, we're gonna bury them in his old property.
Now it's seen as a national treasure.
Now it's a national treasure, yeah. But it was kind of meant to be an insult first. So, remember we talked a bit about him last time, so I'm not going to go any further than that.
Everybody, minus a few people, has the same gravestone.
Yeah. Most of them are of course, people adopt the cross, the simple white cross. I mean, like I qualify for one. My wife told me you can't do it because we're supposed to get joint headstones. So,
Yeah.
I can't just be like, okay, wife, you get buried over there, and I'm gonna have mine over there. So. All right. So, reaction to Fort Sumter. Maybe I'll get it and let the kids have it. Here, kids. Giant granite cross with my name on it. But I can't do that either. They want me. I think you got to pay like $100 or something. It's supposed to be it's like super cheap. It's super cheap. All right. In the South, many states view the siege of Fort Sumter as an act of Northern aggression. So, yeah, remember, like I was just saying, they were like, this is our stuff here. We're not part of you anymore. Get your soldiers out of there and give us back our stuff and stop prodding us. We warned you. States that had previously chosen not to secede were now ready to join the Confederacy. Remember, they were already on their sides. They were like, yeah, you're our Southern brothers and sisters. And they're reading the newspapers coming out of here. So they're reading the stories from the Southern South Carolina point of view. And they're like, whoa, hold up. We didn't want to leave the Union because we wanted to avoid war. But now that they believed that the Union started it, they were like, it's on. And so this was like blown up. You had Southern cities where you had just throngs of young men flooding in to join the military. There was a lot of pent-up rage and anger. And a lot of young guys had very romantic thoughts on just how awesome war could be and stuff. They thought they would go in, spend a couple of weeks whipping some Yankees, and come back home heroes, and everything would just be all cherry pie after that. But it doesn't. So Lincoln called the states to mobilize their militias for war. So remember, U.S. doesn't keep a standing army. Yeah. Oh, bathroom. Oh, I didn't see that. Oh, I thought you were doing this. It's like, what? Okay.
Yes.
Got to cross your legs, remember? Ooh, gotta go. So, all right. So, yeah, so it's going to be a while till the U.S. maintains a standing army because they're expensive. And we weren't really worried about being invaded by Canada. So there wasn't really a point to it. So what they had to do, they have to mobilize the local militias because it was up to the states really to have their own volunteer people who do all the stuff. But now that there's a war, you have to enlist. So they have to get people sign those year-long contracts, train them, make sure they're uniform. It takes some time. Virginia will refuse Lincoln's call for troops, however, and instead say bye-bye and secede from the Union. Richmond, Virginia, then became the capital for the Confederates, and that's really close to D.C. Western Virginia chose to ratify a new constitution, take an oath of allegiance to the Union, and request admission to the U.S. So not everybody agreed to this. The western part of Virginia didn't have good territory for plantation life. It's more mountainous, the people were more independent, and most of the people in the western part of Virginia had a distaste for slavery and wanted to stay within the United States. So they left Virginia. They said, forget it. We're going to be our own state and stayed in America. So that's how we got West Virginia, because Virginia used to be bigger. So Robert E. Lee, a Virginian and an officer in the U.S. Army, found himself in a difficult position. Remember, we talked a bit about him the other day. General Winfield Scott called Lee the best soldier I've ever saw in the field. Remember, Winfield Scott was the guy who won the Mexican-American War. So he was their top dog. He was coming up with the plan, what they call the Anaconda Plan, to help win the Civil War for the North. But he was really old. He was way too old to unite troops and to lead troops into battle. He's actually going to pass away early on here in the war. But even Lincoln offered Robert E. Lee to be in charge of the Union Army. He offered him the head position. He's like, please come save your country. But Lee said, sorry, I'm a Virginian first and part of America second. And so he resigns from the U.S. Army. He goes back to Arlington and tried to retire. But then Virginia's going to ask him to lead the military. And he's like, well, okay. You are my country. And so he does that. So just one of those kind of crazy twists.
The Union Army was good in the, the Union Army.
Yeah, carefully say it to you. Yeah.
Union Army was north.
Yeah.
Confederate was south.
Yeah, and the Union Army is what we think of United States of America. And the South of the Confederate States chose to leave the USA, right? They're like, we're going to be the CSA, So, which,
Confederate States.
yeah, which didn't last that long, right? So, now the thing is though, historians are in disagreement over this, because could a state still secede from the Union? Is it possible that one of our 50 states could leave? Well, most people say no, but there are some who actually say, well, that's possible. And if they do, what if nobody stops them? Right. And that's why Lincoln sees it so important for him to mobilize his military. He sees that if he can't take them to court, he can't beg them to come back. The only way to do it is with force of the military. And so you left our group, therefore we will fight you until you rejoin our group. So what's my phone saying? Well, I don't want to wait all day on Logan. Parent Square. That's about the fun run. I should probably look at this. Probably stuff that we've already talked about. Yeah, because the storm chance is really high on Friday. I don't know what time it all is supposed to kick off. So now the younger kids can go to the gym. But gosh, it won't open. I swear this is like the worst stinking app.
What is?
Parent Square. I like the other ones so much better. I like Remind better. Most places use Remind. Parent Square is janky.
No. Why did they switch it?
It was a decision from the head office. And they never tell us why things happen. They just make things happen. All right. While I'm looking this up, let's go ahead and move on to the next one. Hey, you can barely see it, but hey, what's being built in the background there?
What? The White House?
White House?
No.
Look at those big columns. That is Capitol. It's the Capitol building. It's Capitol Hill. That's where Congress and all those people. Yeah. So close. Yeah. Remember, the White House is more of kind of like a big mansion. All right. This is I know, but yeah. So they got cranes and they're building it all up. They didn't even put the dome on it yet. Has no hat. So, but this here, man, this stinks. I just need to fix the transition. And whenever you make PowerPoints into a Google slide, it wants to do some really funky stuff. And it'll be like, but I'm asking you to do the same thing. Forget it. It's going to take all day. All right. So this is Lincoln's first inauguration in any case. So you can't really see it, but there's a crowd of people back there. He's being sworn in. You can barely make him out. So, and he's being sworn in, all this stuff. So President Lincoln offered Lee field command of all Union forces. I already said that. And the top position of military leadership. Robert E. Lee, who had served 30 years in the Army, saw himself as a man of his state before his country. So even though he served the United States military, it's so ingrained that instead of being like, my God, my family, my country, it was, my God, my family, my state, then my country. So it was more like a four-level cake of allegiance. So I cannot raise my hand against my birthplace, my home, my children, quote Robert E. Lee. He resigned from the Army, took command of the Confederate Army after he, like I told you, he went home for a minute, and they were like, please, you have to join us. And they were so convinced if they had Lee in charge of them, and if they just invaded Washington, D.C. fast enough that they could end the war on the side of the Confederacy, and they could force the United States to recognize the secession. Arkansas, too, joins the Confederacy after voting down secession earlier. So they were on the fence. But once the war kicked off, people who are on the fence are going to join one side or the other. North Carolina and Tennessee, the 11th and final state, also seceded under similar circumstances as Arkansas. When called to raise troops for the Union, they voted to leave instead. So, and just like we saw with Virginia, when Lincoln said, I need you to help me raise an army to stop this insurrection, they said, no, sir, we think they're right, and we are going to leave and join them. So, there you go. Like I said, according to their messaging, they saw Lincoln as an aggressor with the military. On the flip side, in the North, they were like, you're trying to break up all of society. So, it's a very complicated issue. So what you have to do as historians, though, you got to look at all sides. You got to understand people's motivations. You have to have empathy, even with those you may disagree with. Maybe now I can read it. Yeah. And so 11:30 is when your thing is supposed to work. It says parents are invited to come watch, but you can't come in the building because you'll spread diseases.
That'd be cool.
And if it rains, it'll be rescheduled for you old kids. And if it rains, the parents can't watch the little ones in the gym because of the diseases. And you can wear clothes, plain clothes, if you're going to get the powder on you so they don't get all stained up or something that, don't bring your Sunday best.
Okay.
If you're going to get the powder on you. Okay. Yeah, okay. I really hope it goes through. Now, if it's at least they're willing to reschedule it because people are donating and with the pledges and all that. So, all right. So let's move on next one. It's Lincoln in the background. Man,
Oh, yes, you know the one.
I might have to. It's going to take like forever because you got to go in, you got to delete them individually, you got to go back and animate, and then you got to tell it how you want it to animate. And I like the default. Well, yeah, the transition animation helps me like show the image, and then I can transition with the text over it.
Oh, I was thinking
Yeah.
like only animated text, and I was like, that's
No.
hard. Why did you do that?
Because I don't know. All right, so the state's in disarray. So all the Confederate states, all 11, have finally left, and they're joining together. The Union's calling forth its army, and the Southerners are amassing their forces as well. So As the Massachusetts regiment marched, that's the Union side, Massachusetts is in the north, through Baltimore to Washington, D.C., a pro-secession riot broke out. And you're like, why, you might ask? Well, Washington, D.C. is right there, and it's almost part of Maryland. And Maryland has a weird place. It is a very pro-slavery, lots of plantation state. So there was a lot of sympathizers for the South. But they chose to stay in the Union. So they chose to stay in the United States. So like, we're pro-America, but we really want to keep our plantations and people enslaved. So a lot of mixed politics. And so in Washington, D.C., a pro-secession riot broke out. They were like, let them go, stop this war. Lincoln then proclaimed martial law in Washington, and had suspects arrested without charges. So he suspended habeas corpus. What's habeas corpus? It's Latin. It means half the body, like the body of law.
Wait, where does it say?
Oh, okay.
It's not up there. So
Oh,
Habeas corpus is half the body, so half the body of law.
yeah, so that means you can't imprison someone without charging them for a crime.
Right.
So he's putting people in jail without a crime.
Mm.
So without the body of law. And he's going to keep these people in jail until the war's over. And he's like, you are potential Southern sympathizers, like a terrorist. You're going to rouse up some riots. You're going to get in the way of this horrible thing going on. Now, nobody really questioned that because this was a national emergency. But this is one of those things that some people criticize Lincoln for, because Lincoln's one of America's most favorite presidents. So people were like, oh, he shouldn't have done this because he said president where we could do this to others later, maybe unjustly. Then voted to remain neutral. So did Kentucky. So it's complicated, right? You've got all these states. Remember, the states have a lot of sovereignty, they have a lot of say-so on what they can and can't do. And some states chose to join the Southern side. Other states chose to stick it out with Lincoln. And a couple of states decided to stay out of it altogether. And both the North and the South honored the neutrality. The last thing they wanted to do after the war started was to try to lose the moral high ground and to add more states to come in to fight. Now, just because the states chose not to fight doesn't mean the individuals didn't. So people could leave their state and join either the Northern or the Southern Army. And this happened a lot. You would have Southerners who disagreed go up north and join the Union Army. You would have people up north go to the South and join the Confederate Army. That's why they say there are recorded cases of family members who went to one side or the other. My grandmother was telling me about how she visited the cemetery of her great uncles. Both brothers buried next to each other. One died for the Union Army, one died for the Confederate Army. So people had different ideas. But it's complicated how people think about things, like who's on the right side, who's wrong, which is the lesser of two evils. You have to make that decision in a lot of things. The governor of Missouri, however, wanted secession despite the many Union supporters in his state. So you have a governor who's like, whoa, hold up a second. I think we need to join the South. I think we need to be part of this Confederacy. But most of the people in there were like, no, are you crazy? You're a crazy governor. So Union forces occupied and controlled the state capital and ran the governor out and all of his friends. They're like, no, sir, we're not going to let you take over this state during time of war. Lincoln called on a massive increase in the army and ordered the Navy to place a blockade on southern ports. Lincoln realized very, very quickly that though the South had a lot of agricultural land, they relied so heavily on plantation crops, cash crops to sell overseas, that if he could choke that off, they would run out of money, they wouldn't be able to import weapons, and they wouldn't be able to buy food for the troops. It's going to take some time, and they will learn to catch up. But the South's going to have a really hard time transitioning to growing food instead of cotton and indigo and tobacco. And so it's good. They wrongly guess that they're going to be able to sell these things to England and make enough money to fund the war. But some things are going to happen. Like, for one, England isn't really going to want to get too involved with this mess. And they're actually going to find that the guy in charge of Egypt, whose name was Muhammad Ali, was more than willing to grow cotton along the Nile. And it was actually better cotton than they had in the South here. And so England started buying cash crops from Egypt instead. The blockade prevented even more of this. The South didn't have a navy. They have a couple of boats here and there, but not really a good organized navy, so they are cut off. The now aged General Winfield Scott, remember I was saying from Mexican-American War, wished to invade down the Mississippi River, cut the South off from the world along with the blockade, and ruin its economy through the Anaconda Plan, to leave them to where they're basically just small farms. The South at this time had no factories to make cannons. They had no factories to make guns. Though they will start developing these factories in places like Houston. It's going to take time. They can't do it overnight. They're always going to struggle with money and supplies because they're going to get cut off from the world markets, and they just can't build things themselves. It's not what their economy was based around. They're going to try to have slaves do things like make war supplies. And slave labor, enslaved people, they have no incentive to work hard, so they're notorious for sabotaging their own work. Because if you break the machine that you've been having to use to slave over day in, day out, you might get a break. And it's a form of protest. So this happened left and right all over the place. And so the South had a lot of things against it. But they are going to start out with a very well-run army. They are going to have the best military leadership. The best. Let me see where we are at on this. And I'll know how much further we're going to go. Okay. I'd like to do 2 more today. And then that would be a pretty good pace for us to move on next week to our final exam. My discussion over Reconstruction is going to have to be real brief, unfortunately. All right, so good. You can't see it, but it's actually a map in the background there of Texas counties that are made up at this time that vote to secede and which ones vote to stay. A lot of the southern ones that had high population density of Czech immigrants, Hispanic immigrants, and German immigrants voted to stay in the Union. And so you're actually going to see parts of Texas where the Texans are going to mobilize their militia to go watch those people. They're like, we don't trust you. You didn't vote for secession like we did. So they're going to watch out because they're afraid that they're going to actually sabotage Texas, right? So, in note, 1861, Texas secedes from the Union. Governor Sam Houston fought to stay in the Union, however. He was kicked out of office and lost most of his status. Yes, Sam Houston, if you remember, he was the hero of the Texas Revolution. He was Texas' first president, and then he was Texas' first governor. His whole life, well, not his whole life, but his whole life in Texas was to have it be part of America. And he went up to Austin. He went up to the Capitol, and he called them all fools. And they threatened to kill him, drag him out in the lawn, murder him right in front of the Capitol. And so he retired to his little house. And shortly after secession, he died. And his last words were, "Texas, my Texas." He was very, very depressed that Texas left the Union. Many Texans chose to secede for states' rights, the protection of slavery, and they claimed that the Union did little to protect it from hostile Indians. So they wrote like a breakup letter with America, right? And in the breakup letter, kind of like the Declaration of Independence way back when, was like a litany of things like America didn't do this, America didn't do that. One of their main complaints was that the U.S. did little to send troops to stop Apache and Comanche raids in West Texas. And if you remember Robert E. Lee, that's actually one thing he did. He spent years in the West Texas desert fighting Comanches. But the Apache and especially Comanche will be kicked out of Texas at the end of this war by General Sherman. So I guess careful what you wish for. At the beginning of the war, Lincoln was very careful to explain it was about keeping the U.S. together. He wanted to keep slavery out of the discussion. He was like, I am not trying to take anybody or anything from you. I just want to keep us together. You got to stop it. The North held considerable advantages over the South. The North had twice the population of the South, much better transportation and manufacturing. They had most of the railroads. They had most of the roads, and nearly all of America's banking. The North also had good diplomatic connections with the world. The world recognized America as a country. The Confederacy is going to fight to get recognized by other nations. It's not going to be a very successful endeavor. If you're not recognized as a separate country, you don't get things like defense treaties or trade agreements or weapon imports. You don't get those kind of things when you're not a country. At least not back then. I mean, later on, we'll see with insurgencies and stuff. It'll happen all the time, but that's later. All right, let's go to the last one for the day, and then we'll call it good. Change you. Whoop. All right, so the Confederates Mission, last one. The Confederates' goals in the war were simple. So Lincoln was like, I gotta get you guys back together. I promise I'm not going to do anything about slavery. The Confederates were like, we've got to keep the war going as long as possible till the North gives up. They didn't need to conquer the North. They needed to survive as a new country. But we're going to see that that's going to flip. They're going to have a real close shot to taking Washington, D.C. But then they kind of let it slip. The war goes on. They faced enormous odds, though. They started the war with no army. They had some militias, that was it. They had no navy. They had almost no war supplies. Most of their war supplies were things that they could take from the federal forts that just happened to be in their territories. They had no government structure. They had state governments, but they didn't have a unifying government. And the whole point was to have individual states' rights. So trying to tell individual states what to do in the war was hard. They wouldn't listen to each other. Some of the states wouldn't even put in war funds for the army that was fighting for them. They're like, sorry, the economy's too bad. We can't do that. So foreign recognition, like I said, nobody wanted to recognize them. They're like, we don't want to get involved in this. That looks like a revolution or a civil war, but it's bloody and we want to stay out. And they had no political unity. Like I said, sometimes it was every state for themselves. The only thing that would unify within the Confederate States was their military. However, in the South, young men flooded to join the new army for honor and battle. Remember, the warrior culture was much more of a Southern thing. These were guys who spent more of their time hunting. They were more accurate with their rifles. They spent more time fighting. They still had that Western spirit of individualism. And so you're going to see that they are going to come off with full force that the Union is going to be too timid to handle at first. The time Lincoln called for an increase in the army, the The Confederates already had 60,000 men. Now, that might be a lot, but you got to remember, right? The North has twice as many, and the South needs every man they can for when it comes time to harvesting their crops. So this is going to be, and remember, most people didn't own slaves, so they couldn't say that. So this is going to be a big drain on their male population, the working age male population. Furthermore, the best and most able generals in America were Southerners and readily fought for their states. So yeah, like the people who went to West Point or who chose a career path in the military, and they're like, this is what I'm going to do the rest of my life. The leadership, they're educators in the military, they're strategizers. They were mostly from the South. It didn't really appeal as much to Northerners. So in the North, they had to start from scratch. The South also believed they could get Great Britain on their side. Remember, like Great Britain needs us, they need our cotton until they don't. But hey, that's going to be our end point for today. We will come back on Monday and finish this up. Come on, end.